Hi and welcome to iWizard. I'm Jordan. This is my lovely wife, Nikki Hill, Dr. Nikki Hill, who is joining me today for, what is it that we're doing today, actually?
Well, we are running through the NPR Top 100 Greatest Fantasy and Science Fiction Novels and Series. This list was generated by the readers and voted on back in 2011. And this is our first video together.
Very nice. Excited about that. So
Yeah.
The internet is filled with lists. Top 10 this, top 10 that, top 100 albums, top 50 toasters, consumer guides. This is definitely the case when it comes to fantasy and sci-fi. There are so many lists. There are entire websites devoted to ranking fantasy and sci-fi books and dividing them into subgenres.
And with the amount here that Jordan talks, we are not going to be able to go through all 100 books on the list. We're going to show them. We will give you a link to the list on the NPR site. But we have come up with a color-coded system. And so any text that appears in white, we are not going to talk about. Anything that is yellow, we have both read, and one of us will talk about it. Anything that is... oh gosh, what were my colors? Orange? Orange is me. Anything that is orange, I have only read. Anything that is green, Jordan has only read. And anything that is magenta is something that I would like to read in like the next year or so. And anything that is turquoise, Jordan would like to read.
So
blue, cyan, blue. Oh, and also anything, sorry, not yelling. Anything that is purple is something that both of us want to read because magenta and blue make purple.
You passed fourth grade, and with that being said, let's get into this list. It should be a good time, and we'll see you after the intro. All right, welcome back. We're going to start with the Space Trilogy at number 100. The Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. This is one I have long wanted to read. Philologist Edwin Ransom travels to Mars and Venus and makes a series of dramatic discoveries about Earth's place in the solar system and the nature of a threat it unwittingly faces. So Out of the Silent Planet is the first book in this series, 1938. It's probably the most popular and widely read in this series. It's basically C.S. Lewis's extended meditation on the limitations of seeing the world through a narrowly scientific, materialist lens, and how allowing technocrats and scientific experts to control the levers of power is dangerous. In book one, the villain is an amoral utopian scientist who dreams of colonizing other planets and eradicating their life forms in the name of progress. Okay, at number 96, Lucifer's Hammer. This is another one I'm interested in reading by the fantastic duo Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. As the great Hamner-Brown comet, dubbed Lucifer's Hammer by the press, approaches Earth, various business executives, politicians, criminals, journalists, and scientists await the impending cataclysm. Earthquakes 1,000 times too powerful to measure on the Richter scale, tidal waves thousands of feet high, cities turned into oceans. Oceans turned into steam. It marks the beginning of a new ice age and the end of civilization. And so this book is apparently about how the period of impending doom before the comet hits is handled by humanity, and how a certain group of people in Southern California struggle to survive. So I put this in the category of post-apocalypse, definitely a survivalist tale. Next up at number 93 is Werner Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep. So I read this book probably 5 years ago, and I have to say it's one of the most original, one of the weirdest, most creative, hard science fiction books I've ever read. Basically, it's about a super intelligence, a singularity called the Blight, that wakes up and lashes out at the physical world. And at the beginning of the book, a ship manages to escape from all of this where the Blight broke out, and it crash lands into this weird medieval planet. And the aliens on this planet, they're called the Tynes. They are one of the strangest creations in all of science fiction. They have a hive mind, and they're these pack-like, dog-like, slavering creatures, and it's kind of wild because the author actually writes from this hive mind perspective, and he does it in a really innovative way. And the last thing I'll say about this book is that the galaxy is divided into these zones of thought. It's really cool. I would recommend you give it a read.
All right, number 92 on the list is one that I have read. It is Sunshine by Robin McKinley, and this is a vampire adult urban fantasy novel, and everything on this list is adult fiction. There is no YA or children's literature on this list. And so in this book, vampires are on the brink of controlling Earth, and human special other forces, or SOFs, need to recruit Sunshine, who's our protagonist, and she is the daughter of a powerful wizard, and they need to recruit her to save Earth. Honestly, I read this book several years ago, and when I looked at the synopsis, none of this rung a bell. Here's what I remember about the book. I remember Sunshine, her name is actually Ray, but she's called Sunshine because she just wants to soak up the sun all day and bake pastries. She loves the sun, so clearly she is human, and she's captured by some vampires, and I remember she ends up kind of falling in love with a vampire, sort of, even though she thinks they're repulsive and they're described as having mushroom-like skin. I might need to reread this book, or maybe not, since it's not sticking in my head here.
Number 90, the Elric Saga, Michael Moorcock. This is one I've been wanting to read for a while. When Michael Moorcock, this is the Goodreads description, when he began chronicling the adventures of the albino sorcerer Elric, last king of decadent Melniboné, and his sentient vampiric sword Stormbringer, he set out to create a new kind of fantasy adventure, one that broke with tradition and reflected a more up-to-date sophistication of theme and style. The result was a bold, unique hero, weak in body, subtle in mind, dependent on drugs for the vitality to sustain himself. This series, from what I hear, is kind of a smart, cynical twist on the classic sword and sorcery subgenre, coming out of that new wave generation of sci-fi writers. But what I hear is that they are coming out with a new audio edition, and I believe the reader is Samuel Ruken, which is Christopher Rocchio's audiobook narrator. The Elric Saga, definitely looking to start reading that one very soon.
Vampiric sword, does that mean the sword there needs to be blood on the sword? What happens to the sword if there's not blood?
I hope that part of the description was not in vain. I hope it really is a vampire sword, whatever that means.
Sentient vampiric sword. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a very different book or series on the list now. Number 89 is the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon. And Claire is the protagonist, and she was a World War II nurse. She's on her honeymoon in Scotland and comes across some big stones. And they're like a henge.
Big stones, eh?
Yeah, like a henge, kind of like Stonehenge.
I've got big stones.
And she gets hurtled back in time 200 years in the past. And while there, she falls in love with James Fraser, who's this Highlander, big, burly redhead. And this is just before the Jacobite Rising of 1745. And I've only actually read the first 2 books in this series because I was watching the Stars TV series at the same time, and it ended up being a bit much, but I plan on returning to these. They are beautifully written. Gabaldon was a researcher at Arizona State, and she definitely did her research in these books. The world feels authentic, and they're just so enjoyable to dive into.
Number 88, Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. This series is part of the EU, or the Star Wars Legends. Full disclosure, I've only read this first book, Heir to the Empire, which was followed by Dark Force Rising in 1992 and The Last Command in 1993. But let me tell you, I loved this first book, Heir to the Empire. It is so much fun. It has the magic of the original Star Wars, which is so refreshing. I actually picked this series up when I was kind of getting disappointed by the new Star Wars movies, and I was feeling like they were kind of sucking. Not to beat a dead horse on that one, but I guess I just wanted to remind myself of how good Star Wars could be. And Timothy Zahn's series really is good. It takes place 5 years after the destruction of the Death Star, after the events of Return of the Jedi. You've got Luke and Han and Leia, they're back. Darth Vader has been defeated, and you've got a new bad guy back in town, and that is Grand Admiral Thrawn. And you might think, how could you top Darth Vader as a bad guy? But it turns out Timothy Zahn is up to the task.
So that was the destruction of the second Death Star, the one that was not fully done being constructed yet.
Whatever you say, honey. Whatever you say. You're the expert. Number 87, Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. This comes highly recommended by the sci-fi writer Christopher Rocchio, who is one of my favorite new authors. In the distant future, after the sun is cooled and dimmed, the disgraced torturer Severian recounts his hard-fought rise to absolute power. So this is said to be one of the all-time great works of science fiction, or I guess you could say science fantasy, it's something like a combination of science fiction, classic science fiction, and that sort of dying Earth subgenre. Very literary, notoriously difficult and dense, I'm told, but in a satisfying, kind of edifying way. The author, Gene Wolfe, who recently passed away, rest in peace, was one of the most respected speculative fiction authors out there. In fact, Ursula Le Guin called him R. Melville, and The New Yorker calls him sci-fi's difficult genius. I've always wanted to read these books. I tried it on audiobook, but you really can't read Gene Wolfe on audiobook. There's just too much there. Maybe this summer.
I can't read anything on audiobook.
Yeah, you can't read anything. I can enjoy a good
eyeballs.
audiobook from time to time, but this one's just too dense. Maybe this summer we'll sit down and give it a go.
All right. Number 86 is the Codex of Alira series by Jim Butcher, and this is high up on my must-read list. I didn't know this series existed before looking at this list again recently, and it just sounds like so much fun. Alira is a land where people bond with Furies, and the Furies are aspects of an elemental magic system. And the protagonist is a boy, Tavi, with no magical abilities, and he must save his people from a brutal enemy horde. And Jim Butcher is the author of the Dresden Files, which is about a PI wizard named Harry Dresden, which are also a lot of fun.
So much fun.
Oh yeah, so much fun. So I'm really excited to get into the Codex of Alira.
I think the Codex Alira actually is modeled off of Pokemon.
Really?
I heard that somewhere.
Huh.
Check me on it later.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but check me on it.
Okay.
I think that actually is the case, oddly enough. Number 84, The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. This is one I really want to read. The Crystal Cave is the first book in the Merlin trilogy, which we have, as you can see right here. This is Mary Stewart's first-person retelling of Merlin's life and travels as he journeys through Wales, Brittany, England, and Ireland. It covers the reign of Uther Pendragon all the way up to the birth of Arthur. The latter books, I guess, then cover cover Arthur's upbringing and his reign, and all of it is told from the perspective of Merlin. And her retelling of the Arthur legends are really well respected. They're up there with Mists of Avalon, T.H. White's Once and Future King, Jack White's Camelot Chronicles, and those Bernard Cornwell books. So I'm just really excited to give this one a read.
So not White Stripes, Jack White.
Not White Stripes, Jack White. Jack White with the Y instead of the I. Camelot Chronicles, you naughty girl. Next up, number 83, The Culture Series by the late Scottish writer Ian M. Banks. This is another series I really want to read. The stories in this series center on the culture, a semi-utopian, post-scarcity, quasi-anarchist society of humanoid races living in these artificial habitats spread across the Milky Way, managed by these very advanced AI. I haven't read a single word of this series, but I've probably picked them up and stared at them at Barnes & Noble 100 times. This is hard science fiction on a grand scale. Each novel, I'm told, is a self-contained story with new characters, and it starts over fresh. Christopher Rocchio, again, recommends this one highly, and so I'm on the bandwagon.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course.
And the covers are beautiful. You go to Barnes & Noble, you pick these things up, and you just want to open one up.
You know you're not supposed to judge books by their cover. Number 82 is The Air Affair by Jasper Fforde. And this takes place in an alternate 1985, where time travel, and it seems like physical travel through literature, not too sure how that works, but sounds totally awesome, are just totally regular things. And literary detective Thursday Next, who lives with her resurrected pet dodo, yes, you heard correctly, pet dodo, must stop the world's third most wanted criminal from kidnapping Jane Eyre. And as you can tell, this seems to have a comedic bent to it, as far as I can tell. Like, I think it's supposed to be funny.
It sounds funny, yeah.
It does sound funny. It sounds like a blast. And Jane Eyre is one of my favorite novels, and this is a thriller, so it's definitely on my to-read list. Number 79 is Something Wicked, This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, and it features one of the coolest character names in all of literature, and that is Jim Nightshade. Here's a little synopsis I put together for you. Jim Nightshade and William Holloway are neighbors, best friends, and perfect complements to each other. They're on the cusp of turning 14, a time at the edge of youth where you both want to grow up and stay a kid at the same time. A carnival arrives in their suburban town of Greentown, Illinois at like 3 a.m. The boys uncover sinister secrets and the terrifying truth of Cougar and Dark's Pandemonium Shadow Show. And this is an absolutely stunning work of dark fantasy, almost written like poetry. This is based on a carnival experience that Bradbury had in his youth, and it was intended to be a film for Gene Kelly. Okay, number 78 is The Dispossessed by the brilliant Ursula Le Guin. And this is a utopian sci-fi that has been on my to-read list for a while now. So hopefully I get to it soon. And in it, a physicist named Shavik journeys from his anarchist world to the utopian mother planet of Eurus to tear down the walls of hatred that have isolated his planet from the rest of civilization. And this was the winner of the Hugo, Locus, and Nebula Awards for Best Novel in 1975. And within, Le Guin explores different types of societies, anarchism, capitalism, individualism, and collectivism. The Kushiel's Legacy by Jacqueline Carey. Phaedra is born with a scarlet mote in her left eye, so it's like a red fleck in her left eye, and sold into indentured servitude as a child. The red fleck is supposedly Kushiel's dart, which means she is destined to forever experience pain and pleasure as one. Phaedra is a talented spy and courtesan who must save her homeland. And here's a quote from Goodreads. Set in a world of cunning poets, deadly courtiers, heroic traitors, and a truly Machiavellian villainess. This is a novel of grandeur, luxuriance, sacrifice, betrayal, and deeply laid conspiracies. Not since Dune has there been an epic on the scale of Kushiel's Dart, a massive tale about the violent death of an old age and the birth of a new.
Ooh, sounds pretty good. Number 76, Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. 1973 classic. One I haven't read, but I better get on it soon because Denis Villeneuve, director of Dune and the new Blade Runner film, has chosen this, Rendezvous with Rama, to be his next film project, and I'm very excited. And why not? With a description like this, I'm all in. During the 22nd century, a space probe's investigation of a mysterious cylindrical asteroid brings man into contact with an extragalactic civilization. This has been sitting on my shelf for years, and space objects, first alien contact, maybe it's time to get around to it.
I think so.
All right, number 73, The Legend of Drizzt by R.A. Salvatore, one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. I came to fantasy and sci-fi a bit later in life. You listen to folks like Mike from Mike's Books talk about reading all these fantasy and horror books in the library of his school growing up. For me, I caught the reading bug in college, but for me, I was majoring in philosophy. It was philosophy, classics, existentialism, all that heavy stuff. It wasn't actually until later in my life that my wife introduced me to fantasy and sci-fi. And one of the earliest series that really ignited my passion was the Dark Elf trilogy. The series follows the beloved Dark Elf Drizzt Do'Urden. He's a drow elf who lives in the dark, cavernous underground civilization of Menzoberranzan. And seriously, guys, Menzoberranzan is one of the coolest fantasy worlds in any book I've ever read. It's this giant underground city, dark with neon all over the place, and it's composed of these great matriarchal houses protected by magic. And the point of this series is that the drow elves are evil and treacherous. This is basically an evil society with scheming, conniving, greedy, warlike families. But, and here's the catch, Drizzt is good. He's one of the few good ones.
He has violet eyes.
He has violet eyes, and he is like the only good elf who thinks differently and who questions his society and who ultimately rises up against it. So it's about this unlikely hero, and the story is so good. There's battle school. It's set in the D&D Forgotten Realms world, so I know some of you are going to be snooty and turn your noses up at this one, but please give these books a chance.
Good.
So good. I've read all three, and I'm telling you, it made me fall in love with fantasy, and I can't get enough of it. Alrighty, number 72. We got the nice Barnes & Noble Classics edition. Number 72 is Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. I have read this one. It was a ways back. This is Verne's finest book. To write this, Verne was always interested in engaging with whatever was the most current research in science, in this case, 19th century geology. Back then, people still thought that the Earth might be hollow and that there might be things inside at the center of the Earth. So the story follows a German professor who finds a runic manuscript from an old alchemist and believes that there might be these volcanic tubes leading safely toward the center of the Earth. He, his nephew Axel, and their guide Hans descend into an inactive Icelandic volcano, and all this is mapped out by the manuscript, and they go on adventures. They see at the center of the Earth prehistoric animals, dinosaurs, a prehistoric sea, giant mushrooms, all of these, like Jurassic era plants and natural hazards and obstacles, and they eventually escape all these obstacles by riding on a volcanic eruption via Mount Etna in southern Italy. So it's a little bit ridiculous, it's a little bit outdated, but not really. And you want to know why? Because like 7 films have been made of Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. Even one by the late, the great Brendan Fraser. There's even one, The Rock
The
is...
late, the great? He's alive.
Is he alive? Is he alive?
Number 71 is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. And before all you Brandon Sanderson fans start getting upset and poo-pooing on this NPR list, keep in mind that this list was published in 2011. And if this list were updated, I'm sure Stormlight Archive would be ranked higher than this. And also, let me just rag on the NPR description here for a moment. The Way of Kings introduces the world of Roshar through the experiences of a war-weary royal compelled by visions. So that would be Dalinar, a highborn youth condemned to military slavery. That would be Kaladin, and a woman who is desperate to save her impoverished house. That would be Shallan. And correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, while Kaladin is condemned to military slavery, he was trained by his father as a surgeon, but he was not highborn. He had dark eyes, and only light eyes can be highborn, right? Anyway, as usual, Sanderson creates a vivid world with creative cultures and an intricate magic system. And of all the Brandon Sanderson novels I've read, the second book here, Words of Radiance, is actually my favorite novel of his. Like, it's so good. Except for like the last 20 pages or so. I did not like the ending. I love Kaladin's character and the story arc as well as Shallan's in those first two books. However, it's been years that I've been trying to make it through Oathbringer. I'm like halfway through it and I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. It's not doing it for me. And I read an Amazon review that captures a lot of this book pretty perfectly. This is Dalinar's Book of Meetings. Yes, it's so accurate. I might end up, unfortunately, abandoning Stormlight. Number 69 is the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, and this is a series I most definitely want to read. And it's known as a character-driven, introspective, epic fantasy with psychologically complex characters. The protagonist, Fitz, is a royal bastard who shares a magical link with animals called wit. And using wit is looked down upon, and he must give it up when he's adopted into the royal household where he trains to become an assassin. Meanwhile, the land faces peril as attackers are turning people into emotionless, zombie-like forged ones.
Okay, I have to read that. And I also have to give a shout out to my pal, Scott Glasgow, who is the biggest Robin Hobb stan of all time. He loves this series, and he'll go to the mat for this series. And if it has zombies and it's fantasy,
I might have to join the club.
I might have to join
We'll see.
The Scott Glasgow club.
Well, Farsi.
Well, Farsi.
Farsi.
We'll just have to Farsi. At number 68, we have Conan the Barbarian, Robert E. Howard. This is a world I've definitely dabbled in. Conan is for sure old school, pulpy sword and sorcery goodness, and it's Robert E. Howard's greatest creation. The muscle-bound Cimmerian warrior, the black-haired, sullen-eyed, sword-in-hand, thief, reaver, slayer with gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirth. So that quote is from one of Howard's best Conan stories, The Phoenix on the Sword, which I teach to my fantasy and sci-fi students every year. The stories in Conan all take place in the prehistoric past, in the Hyborian Age, a quote, age undreamed of, when shining kingdoms spread across the world like blue mantles beneath the stars, between the years when the oceans drank both Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Arias. These are very well written, Conan the Barbarian, very violent, filled with tropes and all of that old-fashioned stuff. So if you like that kind of pulpy, romantic writing, purple prose, just a little bit. If you like other writers from that era, like Lovecraft, who was a pen pal of Robert E. Howard. If you like the Conan movies from the 80s with Arnold, you're going to love these stories. I love Conan the Barbarian. Clocking in at number 67, The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, one of the many Terrys of fantasy literature. I've read the first book, just to be clear here, and the beginning of the second book, The Elfstones of Shannara. And I do have mixed feelings about this, like many other people. The first book in this series is Sword of Shannara, and it's very much one of those 80s Tolkien clones. You've got the elves, the wizards, the dwarves, the quaint fantasy village. The main character, Shay Olmsford, is a half elven boy, and it's just very derivative, and the writing is very plain. Each chapter kind of starts with a long, drawn-out nature descriptions.
Yeah, usually like a sunrise.
Usually a sunrise. But that said, I agree with Mike at Mike's Books that this series is important nonetheless for making fantasy literature popular again, and as Mike puts it, for taking fantasy off of life support in the late 70s and in the early 80s and mid 80s, and for proving that you could have a mass audience for fantasy again in a post-Tolkien world. Number 63, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is one I've definitely read twice and taught once to high school seniors. Cormac McCarthy, just to let you know, is one of my top 3 writers of all time.
Love Cormac McCarthy.
I
love All the Pretty Horses.
All the Pretty Horses, Blood Meridian, No Country for Old Men. Set in an indefinite, futuristic, post-apocalyptic world, a father and his young son make their way through the ruins of a devastated American landscape, struggling to survive and to preserve the last remnants of their own humanity. This is Cormac McCarthy's, exploration into the genre of post-apocalyptic fiction. And what a scary, violent, sad at times, just kind of brutal setting this is, which is very characteristic for Cormac McCarthy. There are roving gangs killing and capturing women and children. Ash is everywhere, falling from the sky. This is a very gray novel. There's no food. And the father and the son, a young boy, are constantly in search of food. So this story is one of survival and love. Imagine one of the best post-apocalyptic novels that you've ever read, written by one of the greatest literary authors of all time, famously reclusive. Number 59, The Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. I have read the first book in this series, Shards of Honor. In a human colony on one of a series of planets connected by wormholes, a young man who suffers from a series of physical disabilities, the result of an assassination attempt on his royal parents, grows up to become a powerful military leader. So I'm not going to say too much about this series because I've already reviewed the book, the first book, Shards of Honor, on this channel, and I plan to review definitely the rest of the books in this series too. I should mention that Lois McMaster Bujold, for someone who has won numerous Hugo and Nebula Awards, I think is one of the most underrated and these days underappreciated sci-fi authors out there. I believe she now actually writes for Baen Books. And again, this is one of Christopher Rocchio's favorite series as well. And this is something I really connected with and love and plan on reviewing the entirety of. So looking forward to that. Number 58, Chronicles of Thomas Covenant by Stephen R. Donaldson. This is one I haven't read yet. You'll know if you watched my fall TBR. I am reviewing this soon. Let me give you a description. A reclusive, guilt-ridden writer finds himself transported to a magical realm where he's hailed as a hero who wields powerful magic and where he finds his leprosy magically, miraculously cured. Ultimately, he must defeat the malevolent Lord Fowl to save the land and to save his sanity. So this series is 10 books long, and it's one of those series that mixes subgenres. So it has elements of epic fantasy, but it also has elements of grimdark. It's got the feel of the classic, beautiful, lush, inspiring, epic world of something like Middle-earth, but also a real dark side and a dark, morally compromised, gray character. The book is kind of a sort of portal fantasy, a demented, kind of twisted Chronicles of Narnia. Brian Lee Durfee really likes this series. And I'm really excited about reading it. And it's on my TBR, so I need to get to it very soon.
You're behind.
I'm behind.
Number 55 is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. And this is a book that we both want to read for sure. And I'll just read you the NPR description here. The last unicorn leaves the protection of her enchanted lavender forest to search for her own kind. With the assistance of Schmedrick, the only occasionally successful magician, what a name, huh? And dreamer, Molly Grew. And this is basically Pat Rothfuss's favorite book, and he has a little quote on the front cover. That's his review there. The Last Unicorn is the best book I have ever read. You need to read it. If you've already read it, you need to read it again.
Yeah, you got quotes from Tad Williams, Ursula Le Guin, New York Times Book Review, all basically saying the same thing. This has got to be pretty good.
We'll have to see what it's all about. Number 52 is Stardust by Neil Gaiman, and I love this book. It's so adorable. Tristan lives in the quiet English hamlet of Wall, which is literally protected by a wall. And to win the heart of the alluring Victoria, Tristan must travel beyond the wall to recover a fallen star from the land of Fairy, where he encounters the impossible and the unimaginable. And this is a just beautiful love story and fairy tale, and it's one that I could reread again and again and again, and it's a quick read.
At number 50, we have Contact by Carl Sagan. This is one I have read and taught multiple times. In 1999, a multinational team of astronauts ventures deep into outer space, where they come face to face with an advanced alien civilization. Totally a vague description here by NPR.
Super vague.
But you'll know if you watched the Zemeckis film from the 90s with Matthew McConaughey and Jodie Foster. You'll know if you've watched it that it is about the scientist Ellie Arroway, who's been working for SETI, the Center for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. She's been listening to radio waves, trying to find...
Did you know that radio waves are one of the few types of radiation that can make it through our atmosphere?
Thank you, Dr. Hill.
Along with visible light?
Her budget is running out, and she finally receives an alien transmission after everyone's about to give up on her. When scientists at NASA and the government decode it, it turns out that these are instructions for building a massive starship. This is an amazing book written by one of the all-time greats, Carl Sagan. And to be honest, for most of the book, it is actually Carl Sagan's trademark. It's about how the world is going to react irrationally to the news. It's about how the different competing factions, how the different world faiths are going to grapple with this knowledge that there are others out there, how people deify the aliens, how we get into another kind of space race with the Russians and with the Chinese. There are cults and terrorists. There are religious and philosophical debates. There's romance. Anyways, it's a great book. Please check it out.
Got it all. And we used to live right next door to Carl Sagan's private library.
Yes, we did.
Fun fact.
Yes, we
in
did.
Ithaca.
Yep.
Number 48 is another on the list by Neil Gaiman, and that is Neverwhere. And this is on my want to read list. This is an urban fantasy, which was oddly a novelization of a TV serial instead of the other way around. And it's a dark and whimsical tale of a young businessman, Richard, who stops to help a bleeding girl on a London sidewalk, which uncovers a world unknown to him, the subterranean London below, called Neverwhere, which is a city of people, saints, and monsters who have literally fallen between the cracks of the city Number 47 is The Once and Future King by T.H. White, and this classic is also on my to-read list. And the complete edition was first published in 1958, and this is a warm, charming, and comedic retelling of the tragedy of King Arthur's life, from his childhood to coronation, the creation of the Round Table, and the search for the Holy Grail. And this is, The Once and Future King is divided into 4 parts, which include The Sword and the Stone, The Queen of Air and Darkness, The Ill-Made Knight, which is the story of Lancelot. And you might remember the film with Richard Gere called First Night. I love that movie so much.
Me too. So good.
And the 4th story is The Candle in the Wind. So not just an Elton John song about Princess Diana. Number 43 is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. And this is my favorite Brandon Sanderson series. And I've been trying to get Jordan to read this for a while now. And so it looks like in order to do that, we're going to have to read it out loud to each other.
Let's do it.
We'll review them together this summer. Love Mistborn. It's a satisfying and well-plotted trilogy where every piece clicks into place and it just matters. And Vin is our protagonist here. She is a street urchin who learns the ways of the magic system called allomancy, which employs metals to manipulate physical and mental abilities. In the first book, she undergoes some kind of like Pygmalion or My Fair Lady type of transformation. So if you're into dress up in ball gowns, which Brandon Sanderson seems to be really into describing ball gowns, this might be definitely for you. And I would call this urban high fantasy, and I just really love the aesthetic through and through.
Next up, we have The Belgariad by David and Leigh Eddings. The Belgariad is a 5-book series, though there is a follow-up series as well called The Malorian. The story, again, is a sort of derivative post-Tolkien 1980s style fantasy. It starts out with this epic prologue with all these gods, this backstory about the creation of the world. You have the ordered homeland, the call to adventure. So it's definitely that kind of classic hero's journey. It's written in that traditional fantasy style, but it's actually done really well, and the writing is beautiful. I would say that the big difference here between this and Terry Brooks is that this truly is in the tradition of classic, old school, epic fantasy. The writing is gorgeous. If you're going to do this kind of old school Tolkien derivative fantasy, this is how you do it. All right, at number 40, we have The Amber Chronicles by Roger Zelazny. I have not read these, but here's NPR's description. Zelazny's tales of Corwin, prince of the true world of Amber, of which our Earth is merely a shadow, and his son Merlin, a magic user / computer hacker, have spanned several decades. Amid the eternal struggle between order and chaos, Zelazny delights in tossing allusions to Shakespeare, the tarot, and even quantum mechanics.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, so I think this one is really cool, and I think it's cool that the main character is a computer hacker, and that this is seemingly a portal fantasy. This ordinary computer hacker ends up in this mystical fantasy world. I have read nothing, to be honest, by Roger Zelazny, but I'm told he is a well-respected and sadly underappreciated author, so I'm excited to get into that one.
Number 38 is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. And this is a short story that I read, like 20 years ago. And it won the Hugo Award for Best Short Story in 1960. This is an epistolary science fiction tale. So it's told from journal entries by Charlie Gordon, who is mentally slow. And a breakthrough in brain surgery makes a mouse into a genius. So Charlie wonders if the same kind of surgery would work on him. He becomes the first human subject for that surgery. And then he watches the genius mouse regress. And I still remember this vividly, even though I only read it in middle school. It is a heartbreaking tale, and it gives me all the feels.
Aw. At number 36, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Full disclosure, I read the illustrated classics version of this when I was a lot younger. So an unnamed time traveler enters a time machine and goes first to the year 800 and 2701, where he finds that evolution has split humanity into two different races, the subterranean Morlocks and the surface-dwelling beautiful Eloi. Wells, you might know, was a utopian socialist, kind of had a shameful flirtation with like Stalin and all of that stuff. So this was, for Wells, an allegory where the Morlocks were supposed to be the lower classes who run the machinery that keeps the world going, and every so often they would become aware of their class consciousness and eat the Eloi. The actual mechanism of the time machine here isn't really explained in the book. This is not hard science fiction, but Wells has a long, detailed discussion, meditation about how time travel works, how time travel could be possible. Wells didn't really deal with the time traveler paradox in the way that later sci-fi writers would. He was more occupied with the kind of time travel tourism element of it, but basically, eventually, the time traveler goes more than 30 million years into the future and witnesses the Earth's rotation slowing and the sun growing into a red giant. And that's the end of all life on Earth. Number 34, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein, one of the all-time sci-fi greats. A lunar colony rebels against Earth's oppressive control in a struggle for independence, mirroring the American Revolution. If you read the novel closely, you can kind of tell that it's Heinlein's anarcho-capitalist blueprint for revolutionary uprising. This is a seldom talked about fact, but also you might have known that Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, named his 1975 public policy book after the novel's slogan, the famous slogan, Tannstaffel, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. You have, throughout this book, Heinlein's commentary through Professor Bernardo de la Paz, and you gotta love Mycroft Holmes, this self-aware computer, so many great characters.
33 is Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. And McCaffrey is the first female writer to win the Hugo and Nebula Awards ever. Can you show the book, please, and show how pretty and pink it is? It is so pink and so pretty. And this takes place in the far future on planet Pern, where the number of dragon riders who are able to establish a telepathic connection with dragons has fallen too low for the planet's safety. Lessa, a ragged kitchen girl whose noble birthright has been stolen from her, establishes a deep connection with a queen dragon, and together they must save Pern. I really want to read this series.
Okay, number 31, Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. Again, lots of Heinlein. I have read half of this book. Let me give you NPR's description. In one of Robert A. Heinlein's most controversial novels, a recruit of the future goes through the toughest boot camp in the universe and into battle with the Terran mobile infantry against humankind's most frightening enemy. So I gotta say, I'm not actually sure why NPR and others have said that this book is controversial. I have only read the first half of this book, but from what I've read, it really isn't that controversial. I mean, the government in this militaristic sci-fi novel is definitely a little bit quasi-fascistic, but so is pretty much every government in every dystopian novel that I've ever read. So I don't actually understand why all the hubbub and all of the fury about Starship Troopers. I don't know when that became a taboo to set your sci-fi novel in a quasi-fascistic society. I did quite like the Paul Verhoeven film.
Me too. It's fun.
It's for some reason that too is a controversial opinion. I actually liked the film Starship Troopers. It bears very little resemblance to the actual book so far as I've read, but it's kind of a satirical, comedic, farcical take on Heinlein's great novel.
Number 29 is the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. And this is a comic book series, and it tells the tale of forces that exist beyond life and death, which begins with the tale of Morpheus, the Dream King, whose extended family includes personifications of death, despair, desire, and destiny. Volume 1 is Preludes and Nocturnes. Jordan is holding up Dream Hunters, and that is part of the extended Sandman universe, which is adapted from an old Japanese folktale. The artist there is Yoshitaka Amano, and that is the designer of Final Fantasy as well, which you might actually recognize in the artwork there. And fun fact, Sandman is coming to Netflix in 2022, and we watched a trailer, and it looks so awesome! I'm super excited.
Number 26, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. I first read this book in a book club with some of my colleagues, and then I taught it. A prophetic cyberpunk classic that weaves contemporary imagery with Sumerian myths and linguistics. Stevenson's third novel revolves around a mysterious pseudo-narcotic called Snow Crash. It's capable of affecting people both within and without, and also the alternate reality internet, the metaverse, which Neil Stephenson came up with. Very prophetic, I know. In most dystopian stories, the dystopia obviously is due to too much government. But in Snow Crash, interestingly enough, just like in M.T. Anderson's Feed, it's one of those rare dystopias where the misery is caused by not enough government. This story takes place in a future Southern California where there are no sidewalks, no public schools, there's no police force, right? Neighborhoods have to hire their own private security. There's no immigration control. It's an America that is like so unbelievably libertarian that it's anarchist. The mafia basically runs everything. Even roads are privately owned. Most people live in these pod-like storage containers. The military has been split up into Jim's Defense System and Admiral Bob's National Security. The CIA is now the Central Intelligence Corporation of Langley. Pizza delivery boys drive armored cars, and they have nuclear bombs strapped to their cars, and they enter into these contracts where if you don't deliver the pizza in under 20 minutes, they kill you. Number 25, The Stand by Stephen King. I have not read this. A monumentally devastating plague leaves only a few survivors who, while experiencing dreams of a battle between good and evil, move toward an actual confrontation as they migrate to Boulder, Colorado. Many of King's fans, his constant readers, say that The Stand is his best book, or at least it's in the top 2 or 3 of his best books. Apparently, there are 2 different versions of the original published version of The Stand and an extended uncut version, which fans say is actually much better than the original. This book comes highly recommended by people like Mike from Mike's Books. So I figure if Mike says it's good, it's probably worth a read.
And expanding on Stephen King's multiverse, we have the Dark Tower series. And this is on my want to read list. And in this series, Roland, the world's last gunslinger, tracks an enigmatic man in black toward a forbidding dark tower, fighting forces both mortal and otherworldly.
I want to read this so bad.
On his quest. Okay, I guess it's a both. It's a both, right? It's a purple.
Yeah.
And this is a dark fantasy / sci-fi / horror / western. It's like all the things, apparently. And it's 8 novels and 1 short story. And actually, as part of it, we get a reprise from Father Callahan, who was in Salem's Lot. He was the damned priest, so he makes an appearance there. And the inspiration for this series includes, of course, Lord of the Rings, but also Arthurian legend and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And his main character was based on Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name. Number 22 is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And this is a dystopian novel set in an alternate Boston in 1985. 1995, where fertile women are considered a national resource.
You did some kind of panel on this at work?
Yeah, I was the environment expert on the panel.
And you had to read the book, yeah.
I had to read the book. I've read the book, yes. And so women's bodies are vessels, and they're told to think of themselves as pearls, so they cannot drink alcohol, they have to eat healthy, and they are also property of elite men and their families for reproductive purposes. And these women don't even get to keep their names. They get to be of and the man's name, so like of Fred.
As it should be, exactly.
Of Jordan. No, never. Never. And so what happened is that the environment got so polluted that there were many birth defects and rising infertility. And there was something like a 1/4 chance for a healthy baby to be born. So, yeah, that's terrible.
All right, we're at number 20, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read this and teach this every year, so this one's close to my heart. Do I really have to give a synopsis for Frankenstein? I think not. We all hopefully know the story of the mad scientist who takes body parts from charnel houses and graves and creates a monster, and how all of this goes terribly wrong in the end. Shelley's story, which, by the way, she wrote when she was only 19 years old, is considered the first true work of science fiction. I mean that in the modern sense of the term. So it's definitely important for that reason, but it's also a brilliant meditation on responsibility, moral responsibility. What is the responsibility of the creator to the created? What happens when wisdom and moral clarity takes a back seat to scientific curiosity and technological power? But it's also about what does it mean to be a human, and should human beings be able to play God? Number 19, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. Again, another one I've read and taught. Billy Pilgrim returns home from World War II only to be kidnapped by aliens from the planet Tralfamadore, who teach him that time is an eternal present. So this is one of the all-time great war novels, a kind of early postmodern war classic. It's a slim volume, pretty easy to read, well-paced, a truly profound reflection on what war actually is, kind of discarding all of the cliches and tropes of those war novels we had to read in high school, All Quiet on the Western Front, Thin Red Line, books like that. Definitely listen to the audiobook. There's a great audiobook version of Slaughterhouse-Five, and it's read by Ethan Hawke. He does the entire thing in this really poignant, almost creepy kind of whisper. It's got time travel, this novel. It's got other sci-fi elements. Definitely a big recommend from me.
I would definitely listen to that.
Yeah. Ethan Hawke.
Of course. Number 18 is The King Killer Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. And of these chronicles, I have only read Name of the Wind, and it has been a while. But I remember really enjoying this and thinking that the magic system was creative. You get to control anything if you just knew its true name. But Kvothe, the narrator and protagonist, is kind of too perfect. He's a bit of a Gary Stu. I do remember that. And I know that he's the narrator and he may be a little bit unreliable in inflating himself. And most of the story is written in the first person. But I do remember enjoying this quite a bit. And number 15 is Watchmen. This is another graphic novel. I read it back in college. It was written by Alan Moore, and the artist is Dave Gibbons. This is part of DC Comics, and in this novel, an alternate history is depicted where superheroes known as the Crime Busters within the 1940s and 60s changed the course of history. So, for example, in Watchmen, US actually won Vietnam. And The Crime Busters, at the point that the graphic novel begins, have long been disbanded, but former members start turning up dead, so they must reunite and find the murderer. And if you recall, Alan Moore also wrote From Hell, Swamp Thing, V for Vendetta, Batman, The Killing Joke. So he has quite the DC resume behind him. And I have not yet seen the HBO series, but I remember fondly the movie with Billy Crudup where he plays a Dr. Manhattan.
Number 13, Animal Farm by George Orwell. Animal Farm is Orwell's classic allegory of the Russian Revolution. You have a farm in rural England, Manor Farm, run by the brutal, mean, drunken farmer, Mr. Jones. And then, of course, his animals rise up like the Bolsheviks and overthrow him, and they try to run the farm themselves from year zero. This novel has elements of satire, as I said, allegory, and it's a brutal takedown of the ideals and the inner workings of communism, especially of the Marxist-Leninist variety, as the pigs try to take control and by the end of the novel, become exactly as brutal, hypocritical, propagandistic, and oppressive as their former overlord, right? It's like that Nietzsche quote, in fighting monsters, be sure that you do not become the monster. All animals are equal. Don't you remember, comrade?
But some are more equal.
But some are more equal
They are.
than others, right? We pigs are brain workers, so you have to let us have the apples and the oats. All right, so number 12, Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. The Amazon Prime special is going on right now, so all of you are into that at this point. Truly an epic 14-book series. I have only have experience with the first book. I've read the entirety of that and a little bit of the second. This series was going to be 12 books in total, but sadly, the author Robert Jordan passed away and chose Brandon Sanderson to finish the series. It starts out, at least in the first book, in very traditional Tolkienian fashion in a village called Emmons Field. The main character is Rand, and he's a farm boy, of course. What else would be the case? With a larger destiny and powers. And then right on cue, a wizard comes into town. In this case, it's an Aes Sedai named Moraine. Only women in this story are allowed to use magic.
As it should be.
As it should be. For a reason in this book that is very central and important to the overall tale. And there's a ranger named Lan. In the book, he's not called a ranger, but a warder. Anyhow, the village is then attacked by Trollocs, who have come for the main character, and Rand and his buddies with their hunting group of companions have to flee their home, oh there it is, on a quest concerning their destiny to defeat the Dark One.
As you wish! Number 11 is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. And this is on my to-read list. This is a comedy, adventure, fantasy, romance, fairy tale, metafiction, all of the things in an upside-down book. And it's about a handsome farm boy named Wesley, and he is aided by a gentle giant and a drunken swordsman to save his love from marrying the awful Prince Humperdinck. Boo! Marriage! Marriage! And I am so excited to finally read this. I have seen the Rob Reiner movie at least 50 times, and I really don't think I'm exaggerating on this. And the book is supposed to have one of the best sword fighting scenes ever written between Inigo Montoya and the Six-Fingered Man. So I really am planning on getting into this book soon. Top 10.
Top 10, let's do
Almost
it.
there. Okay, number 10 is another by Neil Gaiman, and this is American Gods. And I have read and loved both American Gods and Anansi Boys. And in American Gods, just before he is released from prison, Shadow finds out that both his wife and his best friend have died in a car crash together. And on the plane back home to their funerals, an enigmatic stranger named Mr. Wednesday offers Shadow a really strange job to save the soul of America. And so they set off on a road trip across America together. And I just love the aesthetic in this book, because with the road trips, like across like those empty expanses of America, you get like these strange oddities like the giant ball of rubber bands, abandoned carousels, strange museums,
House of Wax.
Yeah, like House of Wax
Giant
style
pumpkin.
stuff. Yeah, like toenail clippings of someone who, I don't know, whatever. But this is where the gods meet, and there's the old gods and there's the contemporary gods, which arise from like the things that we revere today, like television, sex, and now like social media.
These
right?
are the new gods.
The new gods, right? It's just so good, and I've been trying to get Jordan to read this for a while, and I just can't make it happen.
I'm into it. I can pledge to you that I will read it. I think I get it now. Yeah.
And for the rest of the top 10, I should probably slip into a glitter gown, like it, so I can play Vanna White here, because
You be
Jordan,
Vanna White.
Yeah,
I'll talk about the rest of the books.
Yeah, because we both read them, but he teaches them, so he wins.
All right, let's do it. Number 9, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, the British writer. Huxley's classic, according to NPR, is a prophetic novel which describes the socialized horrors of a futuristic utopia devoid of individual freedom. But I think that's a bit limiting. The government gives its citizens, hands them out soma. The leaders in this dystopia, the characters have names reminiscent of communist dictators, Lenin, Marx, etc. This is a society in which people are basically slaves to their sensual pleasures, slaves to their own sort of hedonistic gratification. Citizens are prevented from having long-term partners. They're encouraged to sleep around as much as possible, just as long as the government can keep people wedded to and slaves to their own sort of fleeting sensual desires. Babies are born in vats so that women don't have to go through the inconvenience of giving birth. Everything is cold and sterile, and everyone walks around anesthetized and blissed out. Number 7, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, one of the greats. In a far future world, television dominates and books are outlawed. The totalitarian regime has ordered all books to be burned by firemen, whose job is to start the fires rather than stop them. But one fireman begins to see the value of the printed word. So censorship is the norm here, and America in this dystopia is in the stranglehold of a staggering conformity and an anti-intellectualism. But one of the unique things I want to say about this book is how it all comes to be. People basically bring about their own dystopia. People start to get offended by the ideas in books. In the future, everyone is kind of broken down into their tribal identity groups, and each little minority group has its grievances and the things that cause them offense. So every time a new book comes out that offends one group, people call for the book to be banned and censored. And so basically, this is the story of a dystopia that comes about not from some quick, overbearing, sudden government crackdown, but because some people have basically gotten tired. The people in this society have gotten tired of their own freedom, tired of disagreeing, tired of having to master the skills and the habits of mind that sustain liberty and are required for self-governance. Does any of this sound familiar? If you're interested in learning more about Fahrenheit 451, see my 30-minute review. I do a lengthy review. Just go back in the archives. Number 6, 1984 by George Orwell. 1984 portrays life in a future time when a totalitarian government watches over all citizens and directs all activities. So many important words and concepts that have become second nature to us. You have Big Brother, the thought police, face crimes, doublespeak, the proles, inner and outer parties, newspeak, hate week, where everyone shouts at the television so that they can get us as riled up as possible and create division. The Ministry of Truth, this government agency that controls what the facts are. This story, speaking of that, is really about the way our leaders and the media tinker with language to control people's minds, controlling words, controlling minds. What can you say about one of the most important, iconic dystopian classics of all time? It's definitely a must read. Number 5, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. As the Seven Kingdoms face a generation-long winter, the royal Stark family confronts the poisonous plots of the rival Lannisters, the emergence of the Neverborn demons, the arrival of barbarian hordes, and other threats. So this is basically a take on the Wars of the Roses. And I have, at this point, read books 1 through 3. And at this point, I would say that Song of Ice and Fire is the greatest modern fantasy series. And I would say that George R.R. Martin is the greatest living fantasy writer. Come at me, bro. Yes, do I wish George would write these books faster? I do. On the other hand, he's given us something so irreplaceable, so magnificent that it really does make me happy. And as you can see here, Vanna White, my little Vanna White over here, is holding up the Song of Ice and Fire Folio Society cloth-bound series. And just take a look at that art. Just gorgeous. Just
the
gorgeous.
Iron Throne there.
The Iron
Cersei,
Throne.
right? Is that Cersei? Looks like it. Looks like her silhouette.
My favorite work is Storm of Swords. Definitely a must read. And I hope to review this series soon on the channel. Number 4, Dune by Frank Herbert. The film just came out this last year. I teach this book every year. It's one of the mainstays of my curriculum. Frank Herbert's Dune is game-changing. This series really shows what epic space opera can do. If you want my extended comments on this, I am at danger of going on and on and on about Dune, about the Landsrat, about Paul Atreides, about the Sardaukar, about the Fremen people, and about everything that you could possibly want to know about Dune. But if you're interested in more of my thoughts, please go back and watch my Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Dune. I absolutely love this series in the tradition of science fantasy. Frank Herbert is a master, and he really changed the game for speculative fiction. Number 3, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I am currently teaching this book right now. Young Andrew Ender Wiggin, bred to be a genius, is drafted to battle school where he trains to lead the century-long fight against the alien buggers. I do like this book. It's not perfect. It works well as I would say, a young adult book. It's in the tradition of military science fiction. You can see how influential it's been with Battle School and the games that Ender plays and some of the twists and turns. There's some really interesting things that Orson Scott Card does in this book. Definitely a pioneer of science fiction, and I'm glad I've read it. Probably not in my top 10, maybe not even in my top 50, but definitely worth the read.
And number 2 is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And this is comedy science fiction. It was originally a BBC radio broadcast that aired in 1978. This is super light and funny, a total blast to read. It's about a reluctant galactic traveler named Arthur Dent, and he is the last surviving man who was saved or rescued from Earth's destruction by Ford Prefect. And I just love the opening discussion between Prefect and Dent. in the pub on if aliens landed on Earth, they would think that cars were the dominant life form because they're everywhere. And mind you, Prefect is actually an alien. So this came from somewhere. And there is also a depressed robot in this book, in this series, if that's something you're into.
Every line in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a joke that lands. And also, let me ask you, what is the meaning of life? Do you remember?
42.
It's 42.
Can anyone guess what number 1 is?
Is it Lord of the Rings by
Could it
J.R.R.
be?
Tolkien? There is very little that we could say about Lord of the Rings that would do it justice. All of it's been said before. I teach this book every year to my students. It's on the curriculum. This book is divided into 3 parts, as you can see, and follows a cast of beloved characters as they journey to destroy the one ring of power before it destroys them. Tolkien's masterpiece stands, I would say, at the very heart of fantasy literature, and I guarantee you it will be a classic always. You've got the most epic journey, the most endearing and beloved characters, and the most compellingly devised world, and a whole network of languages. Tolkien once said that he wrote Lord of the Rings just to be a place where he could put his languages, basically. This is the birth of modern fantasy, and there's scarcely a book or an author that I love more. I'll be reviewing this book in the spring, so I'll try not to say anything more about it here. Anything else?
No, just like most of you, I'm sure this holds a very special place in my heart.
Yeah,
in my early teenage years when I read it and just fell in love with it.
And you introduced Lord of the Rings to me, and because of you, I fell in love with it too. So that just about wraps it up for us. That's the NPR Top 100 User-Generated List.
Is there anything missing, do you think?
Yeah, I guess for me, a couple things I'll say before we wrap it up here. I guess I was kind of sad that they didn't mention Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park, Sphere, Andromeda Strain, Congo, all those great books that Michael Crichton wrote. And I was really surprised that none of them made it in. I guess it's possible they thought, okay, Michael Crichton writes mass market scientific thrillers or something like that. But I really think he deserves a spot in the top 100.
Yeah, if we're talking pre-2011, I'm really surprised that Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go didn't make it on the list.
Yeah, definitely Never Let Me Go. Definitely soft science fiction, but it's about cloning people. It's about raising children so that you can clone them so that rich people can have their body parts. Definitely sci-fi themes and ideas and tropes.
How about post-2011? Anything you'd add?
I really think that there is a hole in this list, and that is Alastair Reynolds. In 2001, Alastair Reynolds, the astrophysicist from the UK, published Revelation Space. It changed the game, kind of a golden age revival there for hard science fiction with Alastair Reynolds, and he went on to publish 3, 4, 5, 6 other books in the Revelation Space series, House of Suns, all sorts of other books, Revenger. I'm just surprised that Alastair Reynolds didn't at least make it onto the top 100.
Yeah, speaking of post-2011, as far as I can tell, I would include The Expanse. I've only gotten 2 books in, but it's been great so far. And one of my favorite novels ever is Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which I definitely think would make the
Great
list.
book. Great
love
book.
it. Love it.
Great book. All right, well, that's it for us. We appreciate you joining us and spending the hour with us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, and please remember to subscribe if you hadn't yet, and please click the notifications button to follow our book reviews on iWizard. Bye!